Welcome to the third and final forum in this Getting to Grips with the Economy series. Thanks very much for seeing you. I have to say at the outset how delighted we are that there are a number of students here who I assume are on holidays. It's great to see you, and I hope those grades reflect that your teacher should recognise this. We'll give you an extra couple of points there. Before starting, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of this land, the Darug people who occupied the lands for many, many thousands of years, right through this part of Western Sydney up into the Blue Mountains, to acknowledge their elders, past and present. This promises tonight to be a truly wonderful forum. We have three of the country's most respected commentators, economists, and from a diverse backgrounds, who will offer perspectives, I think, we could say that from the inside and from the perspective of quite different perspectives as economic commentators in terms of both John Quiggin and Steve Keen. And Guy Debelle, of course, as you know, is Assistant Governor at the Reserve Bank of Australia. The format for this evening, very briefly, is that John Quiggin, Professor John Quiggin, will deliver the keynote address. When he is finished, assuming we're running to time okay, I'll open simply for 2 or 3 quick questions to him specifically before we move to the 2 respondents. Steve Keen will, Associate Professor Steve Keen from University of Western Sydney will speak next. And following Steve, we'll move straight on to the final respondent, Guy Debelle. After that, we open to questions from the floor. So with no further ado, I'd like to introduce Professor John Quiggin. John is the Australian Research Council Federation Fellow in Economics and Political Science at the University of Queensland. He's had a busy week. I think he spoke on Monday to the ACTU, if I recall, and this morning to the University of Wollongong, and this evening an address to us. John, being the Federation Fellow, is prominent both as a research economist and as a commentator on Australian economic policy, has produced over 1,000 publications. I wanted to average that out, John, as to how you managed to fit that in, including 5 books, 300 journal articles, book chapters, and across a broad field, including environmental economics, risk analysis, production economics, and the theory of economic growth. He has also written on policy topics including climate change, microeconomic reform, privatisation, employment policy, and the management of the Murray River, the Murray-Darling River system, which you may have seen some of his articles in the Financial Review on that question. He's been an active contributor to Australian public debate across the media, as I say, in the Financial Review, which he contributes regularly, and he frequently comments on policy issues on radio and TV. And in 2002, he commenced a publication of a blog I'll give you a plug here, johnquiggin.com, and it's a terrific blog as well, I have to say. John wrote for us, you may have seen on the table outside, the first in our own series of political creative policy essays, and it's a terrific essay trying to look at the forward dimensions of the Australian economy post-GFC, and we've asked him to extend on that discussion this evening. Professor John Quiggin.
Thanks very much, Eric, and thanks to the Whitlam Institute for publishing that first report of mine, for inviting me here today, and thanks everybody for coming. So, obviously, for those of us interested in economics, the global financial crisis has been consuming our attention for well over a year now, and most of the time, until fairly recently, the pace of events has been such that just keeping up with the crisis as it unfolded and trying to work out and debate the short-term policy responses occupied people's attention pretty completely. But clearly there will be a period after the crisis. Arguably, we're already in a phase where it's time to start thinking about the question of what longer-term responses we need, what kind of financial and economic system will emerge from the global financial crisis, and obviously how we can restructure our policies to avoid the recurrence of a crisis like this. And I'll be talking mostly in this talk about the financial system and the kinds of changes to regulation that I see as necessary. If you read the piece that I've done for the Institute, which is available outside, you'll see a broader agenda expressed in social democratic terms, that is with a strong role for a democratic egalitarian state at the centre of economic management, a role which has been criticised and marginalised in the period in which the financial sector really drove most of the thinking about economic and public policy. So I'll just click quickly through to, have we got, yes we have, great. So you can see the blog. Hopefully the Institute will be able to make the PowerPoint slides available, so you'll be able to check that, but just Googling Quiggin will certainly find the blog if you're interested. There's a good deal more discussion on topics related to my talk tonight. So the magnitude of the crisis, well, I think in global terms, it's reasonable to estimate it as the worst since the Great Depression. So the last big global crisis was in the early 70s, associated with, well, certainly oil shocks were part of it. I won't go into that in too much detail, but in that period we had some major economic disruptions. On a number of important measures, it appears that the current crisis will be worse than that one. In particular, a number of countries experience output contractions of the level that are typically associated with the Depression, at least 10% or more. Notable examples are Iceland, which spectacularly went bust in the early stage of the crisis. Ireland experienced a similar meltdown a little later, and Latvia and the other Baltic states. And it's notable that these countries, which have all been hit very hard, are all countries that were very much darlings of the financial press and of the free market economists generally, right up until the moment of the crash. So Iceland was receiving awards from the listed as the most economically free country in the OECD by groups like the Heritage Foundation, receiving visits from the Mont Pelerin group and things like that. All these countries shared a common strategy, which was one of a low tax on corporate profits and deregulation aimed at attracting a large inward flow of investment, and they did that very successfully for a number of years. But that policy unravelled fairly spectacularly in the period of the crisis. Huge losses, of course, in the financial systems. We have yet to see how large those losses will total up and how much of them will end up being borne by governments, by citizens, either by taxpayers or by people who would be entitled to government services which will be more difficult to provide. How much will be borne by investors, households in their capacity as investors in financial assets. Certainly what's clear is that looking at the very large rewards reaped by those who gave us the crisis, only a very small proportion of those rewards in most cases have been lost in as the asset values that were built up have collapsed. That doesn't do anything, doesn't have any effect on the 2006 and earlier bonuses that the creators of the crisis reaped.